Ed, how did you decide to use the work of Augustus Saint-Gaudens at the U.S. Mint 2009?
Good question, Miles. And selfishly, it stems from my childhood collecting. So when I collected coins, and you look at all the ones that I pulled out of the cash register, they all came from 1907 to about 1933. They were Lincoln pennies, which was easy. I remember putting them into blue books. It was Buffalo nickels. It was the Mercury dime, the Standing Liberty with the shield for the quarters, the Adolph Weinman Walking Liberty for the 50-cent piece. But I couldn't afford at the time because the only way you could get a eagle or a double eagle was you had to have enough money to buy gold.
Sure.
Right? And so as a kid, I just couldn't afford that. And so when I became a mint director, one of the things I wanted to do was I figured there'd be a lot of people like me. And if I could make the eagle or double eagle the way that was originally intended to be made, and made that available to modern day collectors, that would be a great way to fill my collection. And I have one of the 2009 ultra high relief in my own collection because that's who I was, kind of the customer that I was thinking about it. But the more I spent time at the Mint, what I also saw was a drifting away from the rich symbolism that and the story that our coins told, and more toward just the half profile of a person and a bunch of symbols of power of the state in the back. And when I researched Augustus Saint-Gaudens, I found out that he had this partnership with Teddy Roosevelt, who was president at the time, who was also a coin collector. And Roosevelt believed that coins were an extension of a country's identity. And he was mulling over this idea that America has now been around. It survived the Revolutionary War, the War of 1812, the Civil War, things that could have brought down our country. And we weren't going to disappear overnight. So America deserves coins that are uniquely American. And he believed that if you looked at our coins, you would say we were uniquely European. And so he collaborated with Augustus Saint-Gaudens to create coins that not only looked American, but were adequate ambassadors for what America was. And so the double eagle that's now famous was Augustus Saint-Gaudens' one of his two projects. He worked on the eagle and the double eagle. And it talks about America. I mean, that coin says more about our country than any other coin says about their country. When you look at it, first of all, it is a full frontal of liberty, her full figure. There's no coin with a full figure on it. It's always the head of the leader. Second, she is dressed in a Greek-Roman gown with the argument that Saint-Gaudens was making that our modern freedoms have roots in Western civilization, in Greek and Roman philosophy. She's carrying a torch in her front, lighting her way, and carrying an olive branch behind her. The symbolism behind that is if you were a Christian back in those days, you would view the torch as the lamp of God. Or if you weren't, you would say that it was enlightenment, like what the French were doing. The olive branch was quite simply peace. So the symbolism here is where God or enlightenment leads liberty and liberty follows, then peace will come, peace and prosperity will come to that country. And when you look below, she is climbing up a mountain, and below her is the U.S. Capitol. And what Saint-Gaudens was saying there was the first place that this modern notion of liberty and freedom has visited is the United States, symbolized by the shining city on a hill, the people's legislative body. And now she was marching forcefully into the rest of the world. And Saint-Gaudens built that into the coin by using high relief. So she's marching so forcefully that she's busting out of the coin into the viewer's face. And when you look at the reverse of the coin, there's a sunrise with a young bald eagle that hasn't got its white crown yet. And Saint-Gaudens was quite simply saying that America was a very young country at the very beginning of its day. Well, the ideas behind that coin and the design just revolutionized people's thinking about what coins could really do to educate the population, remind the population of what its values were. In the past, coins going back to Rome and Greece were reminders of this is the leader and this is the money that comes from him, and it's because of that money that your livelihood is dependent upon him. Completely different way of looking at coins. And so I wanted Americans to be able to own that. And that's why I decided to recreate that. The other part of this that I wanted to do was when I got to the United States Mint, we had very low morale. And when you look at, there's a survey called the Best Places to Work Survey, which is done by the Partnership for Public Service. Every federal employee has to take it, and they have to self-rank their part of government as far as the best places to work. There are 217 parts of government. The Mint ranked 211.
When you got there?
When I got there. So I needed to come up with something to galvanize the Mint and raise the morale and spirit. And this was the coin that was going to be able to do it, because in order to do it and mass produce it, which they couldn't back in 1907, we had to invest in a lot of new cutting edge technologies like digital design. So we were able to use high def cameras, capture the original best plaster that Saint-Gaudens did, and copy it right down to the last pixel. And then we needed to transfer that, instead of using a Janvier, which is an old-fashioned French reducing machine.
Die maker.
We could then transfer that image directly to a cutting tool that would cut the dies, right? So you lose nothing in the translation. But then we also had to make it, the original coin, given the presses at the time, you couldn't get the high relief unless you stamped the coin 8 to 11 times. But you couldn't line up the coin except by eye. So you can imagine how many errors came out of that.
Absolutely.
Right? And very few came out good enough for circulation. And you just can't make a mass market coin. That would have been the equivalent of a $100 bill back then. You just couldn't make enough of those that way. And we at the Mint had to figure all that stuff out. And that really brought everyone together. And I'm one of the things that as I reflect back as a personal amount of satisfaction, was after our ultra high relief, our morale jumped from about 210 or so up to 58.
Really?
That was the biggest jump in the history of that survey of any part of the government.
Well, your enthusiasm for Augustus Saint-Gaudens' work of 1907, obviously fast forward to 2009, really resonates with me, and obviously it shows the great passion you had for his work. I actually had an opportunity to handle the two existing pieces from 1907 that happen to be in the Smithsonian Archives. And they're just fabulous. They got those right. Obviously, I didn't see any of the other strikes, but just those two coins exist in the archives at the Smithsonian Institute. But the story of Miss Liberty coming at you like that, it's kind of like the modern day action figure of the Avengers and Captain America coming at you.
Wonder Woman.
Yeah, exactly, all that. And it's fabulous, but the way that you tell the story, obviously, has always been, in my opinion, the best description ever for the coin. And no better than for you to have that description because you had so much passion for it. You championed it and made it happen at the U.S. Mint in modern time with modern equipment. But right down to that shiny city on the hill. Of course, as you mentioned, it's from the Bible. Later we all recall that from a Ronald Reagan speech that I
Calling America the shining city on the hill.
Exactly. But even to the reverse of that coin, talking about a young bald eagle. And even for a numismatist like myself that's looked at, millions of coins in my lifetime, understanding that concept of how that eagle matures into having a white crown, and that coin not having it because America is a young country at the time. So, it's just a fabulous description. I've always appreciated it, and it really shows how much you really had so much passion for getting that coin right. For the United States Mint in 2009.
Well, I really love our country, and I think our country has a great story. And this was a great collaboration between a president who wanted coins to reflect his country's values versus his own power. And so this is a big departure. And as the mint director, I kind of inherited the mantle of trying to continue that, which is why we tried so many different innovations and put a lot more emphasis on artistic excellence.
Fantastic. Yeah, it's amazing when we talk about our young country and we're entering this year into our 245th birthday. A lot of people don't recognize that and realize that's where we're at. And it reminds me of the bicentennial year. Where will I be in 2050? And we're getting close to that.
Absolutely.
Or actually, in 2026, we're getting so close to that 250th birthday. But no, it's a great patriotic story, a true American story, through coinage.
The Saint-Gaudens didn't stop there. He also did the eagle, and the eagle features a side portrait of Liberty, and what's different is she has an Indian headdress on her. And what he was also saying by that was this version of liberty that we're currently living in today in America is uniquely American. It wasn't the liberty that the Greek and Romans, even though they came up with this idea, it wasn't the liberty that they lived in. And so he wanted to make sure that the liberty that was here was represented in a unique way to America. And you just don't have Native American headdresses anywhere else in the world. But he was also having a subtle signal there of a theory that he had gravitated to about what made America its own unique country. And he was trying, the historians at the time were trying to figure out, 250 years earlier when they were building in Philadelphia Row or in Boston, those cities looked like their versions of Europe. But the further you moved west, the more uniquely American those cities started to look. Because you can't find Revolutionary War homes in Chicago or Milwaukee or Denver. And so there was this theory going around that what made America into her own unique identity was the land and our ability to go westward and fully experience the land. And that's why Roosevelt started the National Parks Program. There were no national parks until then, and he believed that every American ought to have an experience in the pure American wilderness as a way to form their citizenship. And so that's why the Native American was used, is that's what you encountered when you went west. Now there's a lot of bad history around how Americans treated Native Americans and that type of thing, but the broader theory still stands in that that was part of what forged a unique American identity, and that's what came out in Saint-Gaudens coins. And then you had a number of acolytes, right? James Earl Fraser, who did the Buffalo nickel. Now that you understand frontier theory, you understand why he put a Native American on the front and a bison on the back, right? Was to re-emphasize that. When you look at what's the so-called Mercury dime, which is really liberty, but she has wings in the band around her head, And those wings symbolize freedom of thought, right? Not Mercury, the goddess of whatever. The standing liberty quarter, or even on the silver eagle, you have the walking liberty, and that was liberty draped in an American flag at a sunrise, walking forward. That this would be a forward movement, not a static movement. And so all those ideas came from Saint-Gaudens and Roosevelt's original thinking through what coins should do for their country.
Yeah, because a lot of them were mentored by Saint-Gaudens.
Yep.
And they learned from him that style
Yeah.
and that emphasis on
Yeah,
America.
they all worked in the same studio.
It's fantastic.